Roughly up to the 12th century or so, people used to see this world or the universe as, as a living organism that has spirit or soul. It was an organism. And I suppose I'm going to stick to Europe, or more precisely, the remnants of the Roman Empire, which includes both the Christian Europe and the Islamic uh, remnant of the Roman Empire in the south. And up to the 12th century, it was really the Islamic part of the former Roman Empire that was far more advanced than the Christian part in terms of, let's say, science, uh, especially medicine, astronomy, and certain other things related to that. It's because after they conquered the north of Africa and that part of the former Roman Empire, uh, the the Muslims they've recollected all the writings, all the Greek writings from places like Alexandria in the North Africa. And one of the key writers, key Greek philosophers, Aristotle, he held most of the knowledge of the ancient world in his writings. Whereas this was lost to gradually to the rest of the former Roman Empire up in the north, or the Europe. But then with Renaissance and humanism from the 12th century, few centuries forward, things started accelerating in Europe, specifically in the West, North and West. Well, I suppose that Italy is in the south, so let's just say Europe. And the knowledge of the ancients have started being restored, and these writings of Aristotle came back into Europe from the merchants from the east, I suppose from Constantinople, from the Byzantine Empire, were fleeing at that time into places like Venice and other places, and they brought these Greek writings like Aristotle and other things with them into the West, into the Western Europe. And with the humanism and Renaissance, the knowledge of the world and nature started changing, increasing, developing further, accelerating in Europe. So much so that somewhere from the 15th century onwards, the European or the Christian part of the world began overtaking the Islamic part of the former Roman Empire, which was up to perhaps the 12th century far more advanced scientifically than its Christian counterpart in the northern part of the former Roman Empire. So the world, let's stick with Europe there. The world was seen as an organism or soul or spirit, sort of Platonic worldview, which was held not only in Europe but in India and China with Buddhist and Hinduistic worldviews also. And gradually, through development of humanism and Renaissance, study of nature itself, in the next couple of centuries, this view started changing gradually. Uh, just to jump forward, the world from roughly around the 16th century, people started seeing it in Europe at least as a machine now with parts rather than an organism that has a soul or spirit. And some of the things like experimental science began in the West and in England with Francis Bacon, with his empirical approach to studying nature, experiments, while in France, for instance, at the same time, René Descartes, he was more focused on the mind or rationality and the science of rationalism. So while in England, uh, people like Francis Bacon focused on experience or experiments. In France, on the other hand, some philosophers focused on intellect or rationality. I suppose uh, this kind of distinction you can see even today in the church, the way the church experiences, um, well, the church is experienced in worship, for instance. Some focus on intellect and rationality and talking and teaching and doctrines, reasoning, while others tend to focus on experience, what you feel, what you experience, and that sort of stuff. So, in some ways, there's some links there. So, this is the 16th century after the Protestant Reformation, which focused on liberty of conscience, liberty of an individual rather than of the authority of organization or the church. And also we had Copernican revolution where the universe was seen now in a different light. And moving on to the 17th century, we have a couple of people again in Europe who started developing these ideas further. Now, in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in the 17th century, Mr. Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza, uh, he sort of provided the roots for modern atheism because he would say that once you study the nature and the universe, you realize there is only one natural physical substance out there. God or nature, call it what you want, but it's just one substance. There's no difference between it, God or nature. That's just what you see is what there is. So it's one and the same thing. There is no a separate God, some kind of being who is separated from this natural universe. So these are the roots of atheism, for Spinoza. Now in Germany, we have Gottfried Leibniz, and at the same time in England we have Isaac Newton, and who were both studying things from a very similar perspective. And both Leibniz and Newton, they develop uh, and grow the knowledge of maths and physics, and they develop their systems and principles and laws that now see, and they say this, Leibniz and Newton, uh, directly or indirectly, and they say that this world is like a machine. They see the world as a machine that is not as an organism with soul or anything like that, but machine that is led by naturalistic, causal, deterministic laws. Specifically, here we talk about the laws of motion, the laws of motion, for instance, Newton's laws of motion, and the world as the machine or the universe as the machine is determined through these laws of motion. So, not much of a soul or spirit to it, but sort of like a ticking clock with its mechanisms and maths equations and laws of physics. This is the 17th century. Now, all these people really, Newton and Leibniz, they're believers. They believed in God. Unlike Spinoza, they believed in personal God, and they're Christian, and that was not issue for them. It's just the way they saw the universe. They started uh, people thinking in this direction more and more. Then you move into the 18th century. One of the key events in Europe that took place was that there are a couple of earthquakes in Lisbon, but the big one took place in 1755, and or the capital of Portugal Empire, the Portuguese Empire, was completely destroyed. And after that, people started asking questions because the usual explanation for these kind of events was it's this earthquake was punishment from God. Yeah, that was the standard medieval explanation. And so far, here and there, people didn't make much of it. But with the Lisbon earthquake of 1855, people started asking questions. Well, how come? It was. I think it was on Halloween that it took place, or All Saints, 1st of November, I suppose, that it took place, and the churches were full of people, and all these people came to worship God or whatever. There are lots of candles in the churches. With the earthquake, all the candles fell down, and the big fire started and destroyed everything also, and many other things took place. And people start asking questions, but why would God punish all these people who are coming to church? And they started sort of thinking more in naturalistic terms about earthquakes. And really, after the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, the study of geology began. Geology and seismology, how the earth is and how the earth quakes. So this is when the the science of seismology linked with geology began. And the 18th century, towards the end, culminates in revolutions. And you have first the American Revolution, and then you have the French Revolution, and the religion that develops, that came through the study of nature and through people like Newton, although he was not a deist. This new religion of Deism, he was not a deist, but this new religion of Deism was developed, and in the 17th century, culminating in the 18th century, and you find that in the American Revolution, this was the religion adopted by the founding fathers or the philosophers, American philosophers of the American Revolution, and they claim that there's this supreme being and who created the universe and that sort of stuff. But that's about it. It's very much similar to the God of Aristotle or the Greek philosophers of that time, ancient classical philosophers, where God is seen as the unmoved mover, the one who initiated everything and pushed, gave the first push, and things started moving and spinning. And then basically he left. He left the world to its own devices, and that was it. And this kind of God is not something you can call like a father, like in Christianity or in the Bible. Is completely disinterested in his creation or in his children or his creation. God is God is just created the universe and left it to devices, and he's gone somewhere far, far, far away to sort of do his own things. He doesn't care about nature or universe or humanity. This is the kind of God that you have in Deism. God who makes the clock and then goes away. So this is the religion of the American founding fathers and the American Revolution. Now, in the French Revolution, things are a bit more um, aggravated and aggressive. So they got rid of God altogether and they started worshiping reason. But towards the end of the French Revolution, even there, they realized that people need religion or some kind of God. This is even if he doesn't exist, we need God because we need it. We simply need it because people need it, and we need some kind of order in society, and this helps provide order in society. I mean, simply, basically, that's just how we are created. We have need to relate to God, but they didn't say that, right? But that's our reality, our human reality. If we don't relate to God, we'll find some other kind of God to relate to and worship and cherish in our hearts. So even at the end of the French Revolution, Robespierre, he instituted now this cult of supreme being. supreme being who is responsible for creating the universe and the order that spins, moves and spins everything around in this universe. And so we had this religion of Deism in American Revolution, in French Revolution, and stuff. And but Deism really began in England. That's where it began. And the whole point of Deism is, I suppose, this is mentioned in the Apostle Paul mentions this in the book of Romans, where it says that even the Gentiles know by reason they know, or their conscience tells them that there is a creator God, and what's right and what's wrong in some kind of universal, as a universal principle and universal level. So they would say in Deism that natural light of reason tells us that the universe must have been created, and that it's got you can see the order and beauty, and that there is somebody created the universe. But that's about it. It stops there. There's no God who is involved in this world. Uh, Another feature of Deism, one of the key features that may be interested, is that when thinking about Christ, the central figure of Christianity, they would say that he is not God. He's just a human being, because Deism is highly against anything supernatural. So it's anti-supernatural Deism. Yeah? So everything is about natural things, naturalistic explanations, mathematical and physical explanations for everything that happens in us and around us. And of course, this will be later developed in modern psychology and everything else following that. But I shall not say anything about that right now. So this is the Deism, natural light of reason. Um, so how did this all happen? Gradual removal of God from this world. Okay, so all these people, even in the French Revolution, which was at a point atheistic and completely against God, first atheistic state in the world. But even towards the end of French Revolution, they realized they needed some kind of God. So even in French Revolution, in the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, religion of Deism, there was God still. But now we find ourselves in the it was so towards the end of the 20th century, and now in the 21st century, the science doesn't acknowledge God at all, any kind of God. Even the French Revolution acknowledged at the end some kind of God, but now the science has completely rejected God. So science and God, as far as it is true and correct, the science it's completely rejected God now. There's no God. When you go back all the way to the beginning, there's no creator, there's no unmoved mover. Um, Something happened completely without God. That is gone completely. How did that happen? How did that happen? Uh, well, if you go back to the 12th century, up to that time, as I said, people used to say that this universe is some kind of the world, or some kind of sacred living organism that has spirit or soul. And well, following this in the West, at least in that part of Europe, Western Europe, when the Protestant Reformation began, there was a crisis of authority. Up to that time, whatever the church or tradition tells you that is true about the world, that's just it. That's it. You don't question that. But they started questioning that, and then this whole idea of rights of an individual to think for themselves, and freedom of conscience, and what came through the Protestant Reformation. There is a crisis of authority. So they questioned the authority of tradition and the church, and it says no. The church organization, the institution, the tradition, that's not the source of authority. The Bible is the source of authority, because that's the word of God. And what we do and say in church and in our traditions, that's just human words. So that cannot be the final authority. So that was great because it gave impetus to the whole idea of individual freedom, freedom of conscience, and that started developing in all kinds of directions. So much so that logically, after this first crisis of authority uh, in the 16th century, and then in the 17th century, they started saying the same thing. Well, if you century ago questioned the human authority of the tradition and the church, and then you say the Bible is the real authority. Now, well, let's take it a step further. So in the 17th century, and the culminating in the Age of Enlightenment, in the 18th century, then people started saying in the same place, especially in the Western Europe, well, how do you prove that the Bible is the final authority? Wasn't this just written by humans like the church people or tradition people or any other people? So they would then take this further and say the human reason must be the ultimate source of authority. So just as the Protestant Reformation rejected the authority of the church and the tradition as authority and replaced it with the Bible, now in the 17th century, um, in the Christian West especially, and culminating in the 18th century Enlightenment, the people took it a step further, and now they rejected the Bible as the final authority and replaced it with the human reason. The human reason must be the final authority. That's it. At the same time, uh, the religion of Deism developed. So the traditional God of Christianity, who is the creator, the biblical God, who is passionate and loves his children and loves his creation and is engaged with his people in good ways, in bad ways, in good days, in bad days, emotionally uh, engaged, naturally, supernaturally, in every way engaged. Now he's been pushed back into the background through Deism, and he was turned back into this Greek God, really, not the Hebrew God, God who is just the unmoved mover, the creator, but nothing else, not the sustainer of the universe, not the one who continually sustains and gives us each breath and keeps things alive. But he's been pushed in the background and he's gone, and we don't see him anymore. He doesn't interact with us anymore. And then following this, as we say, Deism, even in the French Revolution, they still realized at the end they need some kind of deity or God. So they kept this supreme being there. But then through the further developments of science and knowledge, then we move into the 19th century, and then we have the modern theory of evolution, which is again, it existed again with the Greeks. They had similar theory of evolution. It's not nothing new. It's just the modern version. And then really, through all the horrors of the 20th century and world wars and what happened with especially with the Jews in the Holocaust and the World War II. Some people just declared God dead. So even though there was a creator, I mean, if there was a creator or unmoved mover or some kind of supreme being, he must have died if he's allowed these things to happen. So God is dead. That was a movement that took place after World War II, the death of God. So then, if he's dead, well, there's no God, and atheism is the only way forward. There's no God. That's it. So after World War II, that's it. That was a new direction that some humans took. God is dead. There is no God. Atheism. That's it. Let's go forward, and that's it. We can go back to the old nonsense. And with again further developments of science and other philosophies, we find ourselves now in times when and everything is questioned and every kind of authority or system or idea is questioned, and everybody has their own life and their own truth and their own understanding, which is fine. But this is where we find ourselves. That's the part of the story we find ourselves in the 21st century now, where God has been pushed especially in the what was once the Christian part of the Roman Empire. Um, this is the source of the idea that God is not there anymore, and we function without Him in this world. Everything is natural and naturalistic. Everything is left to our own devices, to our human reason, to figure things out, how things work, how to deal with all these natural and moral evils in this world, how to um, deal with it, what to do with it. We are left to our own devices, basically to save ourselves. That's the bottom line. And because there is no God, the creator anymore, logically it follows there is no God, the savior either. He doesn't interact with us, he doesn't engage with us, he doesn't intervene. So you have to save yourself. That's it. This is where we find ourselves now, when God has gradually been removed from this world, let's say some kind of Christian world or perspective. Now we are left to our own devices to save ourselves. And where the future will take us, who knows? But the story is not finished just yet. And we are moving forward into some very strange territory and very strange waters. And, well, may God help us all. Thank you for listening.